Hello, I'd like to present to you a book on Atlantis. Oh no, you'll say, another book on Atlantis? It's been done. There's thousands of books, films, documentaries, cartoons. That is true. But what is also true is this. It's a NASA photo of Geological, also known as the Eye of Africa. It's a landform in Mauritania in Western Africa that's so big that it can only be seen from orbit. In orientation, location, size, and down to geomorphic detail, it matches the description of Atlantis. This book has been written by Mr. George Sarantitis, historical researcher and electronics engineer. It took him 7 years to complete and another year to translate it into English. But who first wrote about Atlantis? So many people have written about Atlantis, and even more people know about Atlantis in one way or another. But where did that story originate from? Hello, Mr. Sarantitis.
Hello.
I've read your book. It's quite something. So who wrote Atlantis?
About Atlantis was referred Plato. Plato was the most famous rationalist Greek philosopher about 2,350 years ago. And he refers in Atlantis in two of his books, in Timaeus and Critias. One small part from Timaeus and a very large part, all the book in Critias. Actually, when I had started this research, I had on my mind Atlantis. My research was about the Greek mythology, to find out why mythology has the shape that we have today. We know that contains false and true stories inside there. For instance, Troy, which was, according to the old knowledge, part of mythology, became a reality just the last century. Also the Minoic civilization. So my research was to find out the logic of the myth, to find out why the writer, who is Plato, and Plato is a rationalist, wrote a false story, if it's false. So, with this methodology of mythology, I have found out suddenly that the translations which exist so far were mistaken in the most serious part of them. Some critical parts of the text where Plato describes where Atlantis is, how it is, were mistakenly translated by translators who have done this job 150 years ago or more in English language or in German language. So it was my surprise that I found out after 4,000 hours of work in cooperation with Greek philologists that the most critical parts are so different that the story of Atlantis has to be written again. And this was my next step after the research in the mythology.
So what you are saying is that because of the wrong translation, everything was confused, and this was led to confusing and all these strange and mysterious and fantastic stories about Atlantis.
Yes. Okay. One part is that, one reason is that indeed a lot of translations are literally good, but not unintentionally correct.
Right.
So some important parts of the story have been distorted or refer in wrong issues or have made mistakes, actually, serious mistakes. This is one part. The other part, it's more complicated because we have to examine the history from the Roman times and on, that we have a lot of wrong impressions or wrong informations about several things, because the newest generations have ignored some knowledge of the past, which is written. We can read it. And the Greek ancient language has the privilege to have rules, and many rules, so it makes the language almost, brings the language almost to the level of the mathematics. You can be very accurate if you like to.
That was very interesting. But I'd like to keep something you said and you repeat, which is the words, the expression, wrong translation. So could you give us some examples of wrong translations?
Yes, of course, it's easy. A very characteristic example is the known so far sink of Atlantis in an ocean. In a small sentence like this, there are two substantial mistakes. One, the word sink, because Plato never has right sink, the word sink. It's a similar word, but according to the rules of the ancient Greek grammatic, means covered. And ocean, who never reported by Plato. I know that it sounds strange, but Plato never wrote that Atlantis was sink or was in an ocean. He writes covered by a pelagos, by sea, but not in the ocean. With the exception of the scientific part, which is impossible for somebody to think that, okay, it's always was in my mind. I had the curiosity how a scientist could say that a continent was sink, and people will start searching, let's say, in the Atlantic Ocean to find out if there is a continent there. This is impossible to happen within 24 hours or a few days or a few years or a few thousands of years. You need billions of years or 100 millions of years to have.
Ever.
Yes, if ever, of course. So this is a very important mistake in the story of Atlantis. Was never sink and was never in an ocean, because Plato never said that. So simple.
Mr. Sarantitis, you mentioned a word in there that our viewers probably don't understand. That was the word pelagos. Now, I know that pelagos is a type of sea, and it's a Greek word. Could you explain that a bit more?
Yes, you see, in English, we might say Atlantic Ocean, Mediterranean Sea, Aegean Sea, or Black Sea. Respectively, a Greek says Atlantikos Okeanos, which is Atlantic Ocean,
Greek word, yes.
Mediterranean Thalassa, not sea, Aegean Pelagos, not Aegean Sea, and Euxinos Pontos, not Black Sea. Every word, ocean, Thalassa, Pelagos, and Pontos, has a different explanation. It's a different type of sea. You cannot mix them. If you mix them, you have equalized very different properties of very different seas between them.
So, Mr. Sarantitis, having made the new translations, you came up with new images and new directions, new descriptions. So where is Atlantis?
Well, I have a question here. Which of all Atlantis?
Oh.
Because according to the new translations, there are 3 different Atlantis. One is the continent island, like Australia, let's say, of Atlantis. The next is an island named Atlantis, which is much smaller size than the continent. And the third one is the central area of a wheel system of land and sea, where Atlas had his kingdom. So we have 3 in total places named Atlantis. And this is very clear from the translation. So, where the continent is, first of all. Plato describes that we can find the continent as soon as we pass the pillars of Heracles. Here we had to correct a substantial mistake of the antiquities, especially after the Roman era was created this mistake. And finally, following the descriptions of Plato himself, or even Aristotle later on, we know definitely that the pillars of Heracles were never in Gibraltar, but it was in the Gulf of Gambes in Tunisia. After passing the Gulf, the narrows or the pillars of Heracles in Gambes, you have in front of you a desert area, equal size like Aegean, with lakes, dry lakes. Chots is the name. And till today, even in the winter, some desert places might become sea. So the beginning of the new continent, let's say, is the beginning of the Atlas Mountains. This is an arc, it's a half cycle, and Plato, from his descriptions, describes exactly this, a geometrical shape of a half cycle. And then, with his descriptions, says that in the middle of this half cycle, you will find the island of Atlantis, and then you will find in the island of Atlantis the wheels where the kingdom of Atlas was.
So the continent of Atlantis is all the arc of Western Africa. But what about the island you mentioned and the kingdom of Atlas?
When you follow the instructions, the geometrical shapes given by Plato, then you will come in an area named Attar in Mauritania, which is a plateau. And in the middle of plateau, there is this system of wheels of land and sea, which are part the main picture, let's say, that everybody has on his mind about Atlantis. And this is a geomorphic, geological formation named Eye of Africa, or Gel Erisat, seen first time in 1964 from the astronauts. It's so large that you cannot realize its existence from the Earth. You have to be in a very high altitude.
But all this time we've been talking about a continent and an island and the kingdom of Atlas, which is the wheel, and Gelbe Tushat. But all these places are in the desert. And Plato describes oceans and Pelagos and Pontos and Thalassies. Where is all this water?
Okay. Plato, not ocean. Pelagos, yes.
Okay.
Pontos, yes. An island is an island, according to the Greek grammar, when it is surrounded by any kind of water. Any kind of water. Might be river, might be lake, might be ocean, might be pelagos, might be pondos, might be salt. Don't care. If we examine the east side of this, let's say, continent, then we will see that even today there are lakes, rivers, not in all the length, but in the most part of this piece of land, there are waters. And don't forget that the climate has changed a lot, because the story supposed to have started 10,000 years ago. So this water has gone, or most of it. But modern researchers has been found out that there were very large rivers within Sahara, in arid or semi-arid areas, which now does not exist. And the most common age that they have found in these dry lakes or rivers is 10,000 years. So this is not by luck. Even today, I mean, the last century we had an increasement of the temperatures of the planet because of natural phenomena or with the support of the human activity. But this water might have been disappeared now from the land, but still exists underground Africa. We have very modern researchers also in this field, and we know that there is a sea actually in the middle of Africa, in the most areas of Africa, that you can find it in 5 meters depth or 50 meters depth. And there is vast quantities of water, drinking water. In some areas might be salty. But this shows also that probably all the east side of this part of land was surrounded by waters, so very natural we are talking about an island. Because of its size we name continent. Also, Libya, because of new translations again of Herodotus, has been proved that it was a peninsula, something totally unknown so far. And Herodotus is naming peninsula, but its own way, because every philosopher or scientist has its own words to use to describe something, because during that era you have to discover words to describe something new. And according to another study from a British university, we know that there were a lot of rivers in the southern part of Libya, which is, if you see my diagrams in the book, where I have an hypothetic schematic of this peninsula, it's very similar to this research. And my diagrams are much older than this research.
Mr. Sarantitis, you mentioned that this story from Plato was 8,000 years before his time, which makes it 10,000 years before our time. But anthropology and archaeology say that civilization started about 4,500 years ago. How do you explain that?
Okay, about the anthropology, we are not confident about the total history of the humankind. From the other side, as concerns the archaeology, don't forget that the truth is coming from the history and the evidences come from the archaeology. So still we have no evidences. There are scientific findings in some parts of the globe which shows that there were advanced civilizations much older than the years we think that had started. So we have evidences from 5,000, 6,000 years ago that there were civilizations. Of course, we have to separate what civilization is. So there is a civilization of Paleolithic stage, or Neolithic, or Bronze Age, or Iron Age, where this civilization belongs. So Plato describes a society which is based on farming, an agricultural civilization, based on stone and in bronze, let's say. We don't know the amounts of bronze or the stone, but I believe, personally, I believe that describes a Neolithic or Paleolithic civilization. So we cannot say that describes a society like today, modern or with planes or ships, large ships, technology, such things.
This is very interesting, Mr. Sarantitis. You have described as the continent, the island, and the Geological, which is the center of the kingdom of Atlas, the wheel system. But have you been there?
Yes, of course. I have traveled, carrying some scientific instruments, because I wanted to make a cross-check with Plato's writing if the distances, the sizes were exactly the same. Even I had a first impression from Google. But during my visit I had the chance to be more accurate and find out that the descriptions of Plato with this formation is 100% identical. And I can say, I had also a funny story there, because when you're reaching the village of Antane, which is in the entrance of this formation, the soldiers there advise us to hire a guide to take us to the center, because a lot of tourists have been lost, because it's a very large area, very extended. So we took a young fellow named Jaime, and in the middle of the trip going to the center, there was an opening which drives you to the center. And they have given a name in this opening of a French explorer. So I said, please don't go that way. I will show you another way. Because I knew by Plato that I could find in 9 kilometers away another exit. And I was also curious if I would find this entrance. And indeed, we made this change of the trip. Of course, the driver, the guide, was surprised. Jaime said, how you knew this exit? Because first time, it was my first visit there. And after this exit, we went directly to the center of this formation. And this was my first, let's say, obvious evidence that I was following exactly the steps of Plato's descriptions.
That is amazing. Thank you very much for that. I know we only have the tip of the iceberg of this amazing book of 350 pages. And I know you also have a website. It's www.platoproject.gr. So I'm sure that anybody who is interested in learning more about Atlantis and your book, and about this, I say, world-shaking discovery, they'll find the information in your project. Thank you.
Thank you.
George Sarantitis resides in Athens, Greece. He's a historical researcher, electronics engineer, businessman, and open sea skipper. It was not his intention to find Plato's Atlantis, nor did he have previous knowledge of Risha. Finding the site was an unexpected development, a derivative of his ongoing research into the truth content of Greek myths. He's currently examining Homer's epics with remarkable results. More information and his contact details are in platoproject.gr.